Welcome to Layer of the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. For today's episode, the first in a series of what I'm calling Milestone Moments. These are albums in an artist's catalog where all the stars lined up, where everything came together. They're usually their most iconic albums, the albums that people most associate with these bands. Maybe they have their biggest hits from these albums. They're the most critically acclaimed albums in their catalog. They usually also feature the most iconic lineups of these bands. So for today's episode, I've picked two albums from Uriah Heep, Demons and Wizards and The Magician's Birthday. Uriah Heep released their first album in 1970. It was a self-titled album here in the States, and in the rest of the world, it was titled Very Heavy, Very Humble. I made reference to this album when I was doing my timeline of early influential metal albums, because the first Uriah Heep album is often considered one of three very influential first heavy metal albums to drop in 1970. The other two being the first Black Sabbath album and Deep Purple's Deep Purple in Rock. Uriah Heep often gets compared to Deep Purple, and out of those three bands that I mentioned, Uriah Heep never really quite achieved the same amount of success that Black Sabbath did or did Deep Purple did. And I think part of that is because they were a little bit in the shadow of Deep Purple. I think that's because Uriah Heep keyboards play a prominent part in their sound. Now, I would say that the keyboards function a little differently in Uriah Heep than they do in Deep Purple. Whereas in Deep Purple, there's a lot of keyboard soloing. In Uriah Heep, it's more sort of built into the songs, a little more textural. It adds to the heaviness of the band's sound. But for whatever reason, Uriah Heep never achieved that same level of success that Black Sabbath and that Deep Purple did. Although in the world of heavy metal, their sound is very influential because at that time in the 70s, they were a very heavy band. The three core members of the band that were there in 1970 that would go on to be on most of their albums after that and appear on Demons and Wizards and The Magician's Birthday are David Byron on vocals, who's a fantastic vocalist with a huge vocal range. Mick Box on guitar, who kind of doesn't get a lot of credit. He's not somebody whose name pops up when you're talking about great metal guitar players. And maybe he doesn't have as unique of a style as Ritchie Blackmore. His sound isn't as prominent in Uriah Heep as Tony Iommi's is in Black Sabbath, but he's still a great guitar player, melodic guitar player. Maybe his signature is he used the wah-wah pedal, which is an effect that gives this sort of wah type sound to the guitar in a lot of his leads. And Ken Hensley on keyboards. By the time they got to 1972, which is when both Demons and Wizards and The Magician's Birthday were released, yes, absolutely incredible that their two Milestone albums were released in the same year of 1972. These two albums, they had two very important members join the band at this point. Lee Kerslake on drums. Lee Kerslake would go on later to be famous for being part of Ozzy's Blizzard of Oz band on the album Blizzard of Oz and on the album Diary of a Madman. Lee has a really heavy John Bonham style drumming, and he's also a good vocalist. So he adds to something that is a very signature part of Uriah Heep, which is lots of vocal harmonies. Think Queen, maybe not quite as operatic as Queen, but still tons of vocal harmonies, very epic and dramatic. And Lee Kerslake adds to that, and it really comes together on these two albums. The other member that joined the band at that time was Gary Thayne on bass. Now, I'm a bass player, and I love Gary Thayne's playing. He's a really underrated bass player. He's got a really super melodic style. He plays up high on the neck a lot and very busy, but really adds a lot to the songs. He's got a great warm bass sound. So with the addition of Gary Thayne and Lee Kerslake, everything seemed to come together for them on Demons and Wizards and The Magician's Birthday. Both these albums feature cover art from Roger Dean. Roger Dean will go on to be famous with many of the Yes album covers. So as you can see, they have a real fantasy vibe and theme to them. You know, they sort of, I always think of these albums as a pair because also sonically they feel very similar. The mix on these albums is just great. The producer for these records was Gary Braun, who had produced all the Uriah Heep albums up until like the first 8 to 10 Uriah Heep albums were done by Gary Braun. And he just does a fantastic job on both these records. Really warm sounding, but still heavy and punchy. So let's get into Demons and Wizards. This album opens with the song The Wizard, which is a concert staple for Uriah Heep. They always play it in their shows, and if you're a Uriah Heep fan, that's one of your favorite songs. It starts off with acoustic guitar. It sounds like a 12-string acoustic guitar. It's very melodic. It's got some cool keyboards in it. I've heard it a little bit on classic rock radio, not as much as it probably should be because it's just a fantastic song, and a song that's Uriah Heep fans is always a favorite for them. Next, you have Traveler in Time, which has this really cool I should also note that a lot of the lyrics on these two albums are sort of fantasy based, which as a metalhead, I just love that. Next on Demons and Wizards is probably their most popular song, Uriah Heep's most popular song, Easy Living, which you do hear. It's about the only Uriah Heep song that gets played somewhat regularly on classic rock radio here in the States. It's got a big driving rhythm and these classic Uriah Heep stacked vocal harmonies. Next, Poet's Justice, which starts off with these cool, again, Uriah Heep harmonies on these yeah, where all these tight vocal harmonies, which is just fantastic. And then an epic song is Circle of Hands, which drops down in the verses, and David Byron sings this really emotional lyric. It's got an organ underneath him that kind of reminds me of the Led Zeppelin song Thank You. In the second verse, when it drops down again, there's these subtle ooh harmonies in the background. And it's got just a great David Byron performance. David Byron is just fantastic on both these albums, but that Circle of Hands stands out to me with just him at his best, really dramatic. And the whole song goes out on this sort of epic outro with this acoustic guitar comes in. Great song. Then Rainbow Demon, maybe the heaviest song on this album. Really heavy keyboard riff. It's kind of a slow, dooming number with this Rainbow Demon, big, epic chorus. Next is All My Life, which has this kind of quirky little blues lick with a with a bend in it. It's got some cool slide guitar in it, and it's got sort of a sing-along part towards the end of the song. I will always love you all my life, which is really cool, where Byron goes off and he's sort of ad-libbing with all these I will love, all these screams and everything, these bluesy screams. It's just great. Paradise is kind of a trippy number with acoustic guitar, really melodic bass from Gary Thayne. Like I mentioned earlier, Gary Thayne is just all over both of these albums. His bass is super melodic and really just adds all these like counter melodies and really cool things to the songs. The final song is called The Spell, and it starts off as a rocker. And then it just drops down to a piano with some more dramatic ahs, vocal layered harmonies, some melodic slide guitar before it fades back into the rocking part of the intro that was like at the beginning of the song. Now, what came out at the second half of 1972 was The Magician's Birthday. I'll show you the back cover. Again, a great Roger Dean album art. Cool gatefold vinyl. Same thing with Demons and Wizards. Opens up with the lyrics, and it's got a little fold out here in the Roger Dean art if you open up the whole album. So The Magician's Birthday kind of, it follows in the same vibe, the same feel. It's got a lot of fantasy lyrics. Production-wise, it sounds very similar, almost exactly the same. And it starts off with maybe one of my favorite Uriah Heep songs, Sunrise. If there's any song that summarizes the Uriah Heep sound, I would say it's this song. It starts off kind of quiet, and then there's this thumping bass drum, and it builds into these tons of vocals, and these there's really high vocal harmony in there, super over the top. Then it drops down, and Byron really emotional, and then the chorus kicks in. It's just so epic and melodic. Sunriseville, it is just absolutely great, and it's just Uriah Heep at their best. If there's one song that summarizes Uriah Heep, I think it's this song, because it has all the elements. It's got a great melodic guitar solo in it and the heavy keyboards. Next is a song called Spider Woman, which is kind of a fun rocker. After that, a song called Blind Eye, which has kind of got a fast acoustic strumming part, and it's got these cool guitar harmonies in it, melody harmonies. Reminds me a little bit of like something Iron Maiden might do come 1980. Next is Echoes in the Dark, which starts off with these sort of keyboard patches and swirly keyboard sounds, and there's like a sound in there that I don't know if it's a theremin. If you know what a theremin is, it has this like weird kind of up and down sound to it. It might just be a keyboard, but it sounds like a theremin. This is another one that has drops down in the verses and then gets really dramatic. That's kind of a signature Uriah Heep thing, to kind of drop down and then the chorus sort of explodes with all the vocals and everything. Next is a song called Rain, which is a piano ballad. After that, Sweet Lorraine, which is another concert staple for Uriah Heep that did get some radio airplay. Upbeat, super catchy melodic song. And then you have, finally the album ends with The Magician's Birthday. But before The Magician's Birthday, you have Tales. That's right, I forgot the name of which is a song that's sort of kind of a cool, atmospheric, mid-tempo song. And then it leads into the highlight of this album after Sunrise, in my opinion, is The Magician's Birthday, which is a 10-minute epic. Super cool. In the beginning of the song, it has a part where they actually start singing the song Happy Birthday, and there's a kazoo going in the background, and you think, whoa, how could this ever work? But it totally works, and it's super cool. And then the song fades out, and it goes into this fast jamming part, double time jamming thing, where Lee Kerslake is just, it's almost progressive, where he's doing all these big fills and jamming out. And then Mick Box really has maybe his best moment in Uriah Heep, where he goes off and does this super cool long solo with the wah-wah pedal and these big bends and these fast runs. It's just super cool. And then it fades out again and it comes back into the main song. So there you go. My opinion, the two milestone moments in Uriah Heep's catalog, Demons and Wizards and The Magician's Birthday. If you're a metalhead and you've never heard these albums, check them out. You will love it. They have heaviness to them. They have progressive elements to them. Great musicianship, great singing, great vocal harmonies. In my opinion, this is Uriah Heep at their best. I love their earlier stuff too. Uh, the first album is fantastic. Look at Yourself and Salisbury are great. But with those albums, I think they were still sort of searching for their sound, and it all came together on these two records. Unfortunately, after this, they would sort of lose a little bit of their magic, if you will. Sweet Freedom and Wonderworld I do really like, and those are the last two albums with Gary Thane. Gary Thane would unfortunately leave due to some drug problems. He had an accident on stage where he was electrocuted, and then he would tragically pass away. But after Sweet Freedom and Wonderworld, Return to Fantasy is a good album, but again, they're just kind of not as focused as these two records. And then, not too long after Return to Fantasy, they really sort of lost their way. And it isn't until maybe Abominog where I really started getting back into them. And the last so many Uriah Heep albums that they put out in the last like 10 years or so are really great. They've had a stable lineup and everything. David Byron would have unfortunately leave a couple more albums after these albums, and then David Byron would also leave. But these two albums, milestone moments for Uriah Heep. So let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what you think of these albums. Make sure you hit like and subscribe. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy and stay metal.